I've been involved in nuclear disarmament since 1981, when I went to a presentation by a Dr. Judy Lipton with Washington Physicians for Social Responsibility. And since that time, I've been committed to nuclear disarmament. I've been to Hiroshima and Nagasaki twice. First time was in '93 to talk about Hanford's plutonium processing, and then again in 2023, along with Archbishop John Wester of Santa Fe. His diocese includes Los Alamos, and then the local Archbishop Paul Aitchen, who became concerned about here at Bangor being the largest concentration of deployed U.S. nuclear weapons. But so going back to 1981, September of that year was my first visit here to Ground Zero, and it was a groundbreaking ceremony for the original Peace Pagoda, and it was the one that was destroyed by arson about 6 months later. And on April 8th, 1982, I and my other fellow pilgrims slept in this room. And the next day, which was Good Friday of 1982, we started on this epic walk called the Bethlehem Peace Pilgrimage, which is kind of the first part of my book. I call it Trail 1, going off to peace. The core group, we had many people join us for a couple hours or a couple weeks during it, but the core group consisted of 20 people, ranging in the age from 20 to 67. Our eldest pilgrim was Father George Zabelka. George was a retired Catholic priest, and he walked all of the way. He didn't do every mile. None of us did every mile because we took turns, like driving the support vehicles or making dinner or whatever. But George, during World War II, he was stationed on Tinian Island and was the Catholic chaplain to the men who dropped the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And he always felt, even though he didn't know about this special weapon called the Gimmick, before August 6th, he felt a bit of guilt for just being with the men and actually blessing them both before their missions and when they came back from the missions. And he felt it especially with Nagasaki. Nagasaki historically is the Catholic center of Japan, and mainly because it's a historic seaport, which is the reason why Catholic and other Christian missionaries came there. And the bomb that exploded and destroyed Nagasaki, the hypocenter over where the bomb exploded was only a couple of blocks from the Catholic cathedral in Nagasaki. And after about 4 to 6 weeks, I'm not sure exactly when he went, but after the bombing, he toured both Hiroshima and Nagasaki. He and other chaplains visited the wounded in the makeshift clinics and saw their wounds. But on our pilgrimage to Bethlehem, we walked a total of 6,700 miles. We averaged about 15 to 20 miles each day, and it took 20 months from April of 82 to December of 83. And we walked from Jerusalem into Bethlehem on Christmas Eve of 83. Along the way, this is our route across the United States. We timed our arrival in Washington, D.C. to coincide with the meeting of the U.S. Catholic bishops who were debating a statement on nuclear weapons. And we held a 3-day prayer vigil and fast at their hotel. And every opportunity we got, we cornered the bishops and pleaded with them, really, for them to make a strong statement against nuclear weapons. And we told them about this walk across the United States. And I tried to capture a bit of this in the book. It's hard to realize just how gripped in fear, not just the people in the United States, but all over the world, were gripped in fear of a nuclear war happening within either a few months or a few years. I mean, it was so much that young adults, friends of mine, were making decisions not to have children because they didn't want their children to grow up in a nuclear landscape. And then we wintered in Philadelphia and then went to Europe. We started walking in Cork, Ireland on St. Patrick's Day. Because we were walking, we went through some areas of violence, really. We walked through Northern Ireland, a week in Northern Ireland. It wasn't kind of the worst part of the Troubles, but it was eye-opening to be in the essentially the slums of Belfast, and both Catholic slums and Protestant slums. But as you went up in the social, we're talking about intersectionality. When you went up in the social strata, you got into the better neighborhoods, and there'd be Catholic living next to Protestant. It was very much a social economic, and the paramilitaries preyed on the woundedness of people living in poverty. And then across Europe, we walked through Yugoslavia for 6 weeks. At that time, it was still one country, and it was still under communist control. And that also was eye-opening. Walked down to Athens, took a boat to Haifa, walked to Nazareth, and then down the occupied West Bank. We were hosted a number of villages in Palestinian homes. And it was very eye-opening seeing that situation through their eyes. And then from Jerusalem to Bethlehem. In Bethlehem, people say, and including friends of mine, oh, it's in Israel. No, it's not. It's on the West Bank. It's part of Palestine. And this was Christmas morning of 1983. And you can't see him very well, but the guy in the sunglasses there is Father George. And the rest of our pilgrim. And there wasn't any room for us in the inn. And so we slept out underneath the stars on the roof of the Bethlehem Bible College in Bethlehem.
Can you point out the younger you?
Yes, I'm right here, kneeling down in the center. Yeah.
With the red beard?
No, red.
Well, it had a red scarf.
Oh, scarf.
Yeah, this, that one there.
With the button under the button.
Yeah. So a woman at St. Joseph's Parish in Seattle embroidered those medallions for us and gave it to us when we started. Now, Trail 2, I could go on with the amazing things of walking, but so when I got back from Bethlehem, I was kind of went back to my parents' house in Spokane and trying to figure out what I'm going to do next. And this is part of Reagan's nuclear weapons buildup. They had just restarted the plutonium processing at Hanford just a couple months before. And there were articles in the Spokane paper, and I started getting interested in it. Hanford produced the plutonium that was in the bomb that destroyed Nagasaki. It was also in the device that exploded in the desert on July 16th at Alamogordo in New Mexico. And Hanford accounts for 2/3 of the plutonium in the U.S. arsenal. The other site is Savannah River in South Carolina. Hanford is big. It's about 560, 570 square miles, half the size of the state of Rhode Island. Most of it is desert. And part of it is the reason when they were building these facilities, these were the first industrial-sized nuclear facilities anywhere in the world. And they weren't quite sure if one of them would blow up. And so they're spaced miles apart so that an accident at one wouldn't impact the functionality of the other surrounding facilities. So you can see on this map where Hanford is located in reference to Seattle and Spokane. And Richland is part of the Tri-Cities. Kind of a basic part of making nuclear weapons, or at least the first atomic bombs, is the mining of uranium ore, which happened in the Belgian Congo. And although later a lot of that would happen in Colorado and other places in the West. There's a uranium mine outside of Spokane on Native American land. For that one, it's on the land of the Spokane tribe. But once you get uranium out of the earth, it has to be enriched. There's two ways of doing that. And I won't go into the details of that, but there's two main physical ways of enriching uranium. Most of that during World War II happened at Oak Ridge in eastern Tennessee, outside of Knoxville. They also, at Oak Ridge, they also had a pilot plant for the plutonium side of things. And it was that they scaled up at Hanford. So there's two steps with producing plutonium. One is to irradiate the fuel inside a reactor. Plutonium is not a natural occurring element. It's produced through fissioning of the uranium. And then, but it's bound up with the uranium inside these metal fuel rods. And so Hanford had to dissolve those. And the reactors are along the Columbia River, but in order for the processing facilities, so-called canyons, and that's what they are. They're concrete structures about 1,000 feet long. The walls of the processing cells are 6 feet thick because the radiation is so intense. The uranium fuel is dissolved in very concentrated nitric acid into a solution, and they separate the uranium from the plutonium, and a lot of waste goes into underground storage tanks. And those, over the years, Hanford has 177 underground storage tanks, each about 1 million gallons capacity. And that's the main challenge of Hanford cleanup, is dealing with the stuff that's in the tanks. Let's see. And then once the plutonium is in solution with the nitric, then it has to be solidified to be made into the core of a nuclear weapon. And at the first several years, that concentration, that making into metal, was done at Hanford itself. In later years, when they got Rocky Flats up and going outside of Denver, they did the metal work at Rocky Flats. There's a great book about Rocky Flats called Full Body Burden, and it tells of the just horrific fires that they had twice in the Rocky Flats plants and spewed plutonium around the countryside, and the health effects of that. So this top bomb casing is, the moniker is Little Man. It was the uranium bomb dropped on Hiroshima, and then, or Little Boy, and this is Fat Man, which was the bomb that was destroyed Nagasaki. This is the control room at Hanford, the so-called Purex plant. It's an acronym, stands for plutonium uranium extraction. Hanford's plutonium operations was from 44 to 72, and the largest air releases, mostly of iodine-131, happened in the early, for about the first 10 years. And then the next 10 years, from 55 to 65, were the years of the largest releases into the Columbia River. These reactors were graphite moderated reactors, and they took the water right out of the Columbia. They ran it through the core of the reactors, and impurities in the water, minerals, were made radioactive. And they also contained a lot of heat from the intense radiation inside the reactor. And after as little as 20 minutes, the water was held in a cooling pond. It was discharged back into the Columbia River, to the point where the Yakimovs were very concerned about the surviving of the fish in the river, not just because of the radiation or the chemicals used, but the heat load. The water coming out of the reactors was near boiling. And by the time it got to the river, and during these years of highest releases, they had to modify the operation of the dams upriver so that the water wouldn't spill over the top of the dams where it was the water was warmest, but they figured out a way of discharging the water from the upriver dams from the bottom of the reservoirs where it was the coolest, so that it could take the excess heat load of ultimately 8 of these once through reactors, and then a 9th one was added in the early 60s.
So what is releases to air mean?
So the first 3 years, the smokestacks didn't have any filters, none. It was only after they were able to develop filters for the iodine, and the iodine concentrates in people's thyroids and irradiates them, and it's bioconcentrated. So this stuff went out throughout the Northwest, blanketed eastern Washington, northern Idaho, western Montana, parts of British Columbia, and northeastern Oregon. And, radiation is invisible. So people had no idea of what was happening.
In Illinois, where I was raised, our winter prevailing winds are west-northwest. In my childhood, in the early 60s, there were times when we were told, playing in the snow, don't make a snowball and eat it because of the radiation.
And not just about from Hanford, although there is some evidence that Hanford's radiation did go through most of the United States. But it was through the atmospheric testing, especially in Nevada, that started in the early 50s. And I've got a slide on that. So after, from 72 to 83, Hanford was shut down. But in late 83, it began. And this is a bit about Hanford's expensive legacy. Shannon Rhodes is this little girl's name. And I knew her after she had contracted cancer and was part of the Downwinder litigation. I worked for about 10 years as a paralegal for the Downwinder litigation. The government itself estimates that about 2 million people were exposed to Hanford radiation over the years. There were no warnings of the danger. The releases, the contamination was secret up until 1986. To some extent, the Hibakusha of Japan at least knew that they were exposed. The Downwinders of Hanford didn't know until 86 that they had been contaminated. And what happened in 1986? Citizens like myself and journalists, Native American tribes, were demanding answers, demanding documents, and we were able, through the Freedom of Information Act and political pressure, to get the first batch of 19,000 pages of Hanford documents released. And what we found was just floored us. We thought there might have been some, before the documents were released, we thought, oh, they might have had a close call like 3 Mile Island. But what we found was just absolute. Almost all of the releases from Hanford were by routine releases. They weren't accidents. The largest single release was an intentional release by order of the Air Force for intelligence gathering purposes. It's known as the Green Run. It released 11,000 curies of iodine-131 in one night. 3 Mile Island estimates are about 15 to 20 curies. So it gives you kind of a scale. And Chernobyl, the Chernobyl reactor was a graphite moderated reactor like the Hanford reactors. Hanford's fuel chambers were horizontal, and at Chernobyl they were vertical. But that was the basic design difference between Chernobyl. But when Chernobyl blew, it was millions of curies of iodine-131. One interesting thing about the releases in 1945 is that Japan surrendered. I think it was about August 15th of 45. Hanford was operating at full capacity for producing the plutonium in those bombs, but it didn't stop when Japan surrendered. It didn't stop when the war ended. In fact, Hanford released more radiation in late 1945 than it had the previous 8 months, because they had increased the production level.
Jimbo.
Yeah, thanks. So a lot of Hanford plutonium was in the bombs that were tested in Nevada, atmospheric tests. And the darker redder areas had more deposition of the iodine. This wasn't known until 1997. I was floored when I heard this. That we knew that Nevada and Utah had gotten extensive contamination from the Nevada tests, but most of us didn't know how widely it was. And I was born here in central Montana in 1954. And that morning, when that story was in the New York Times, I found out that I was a downwinder. So with the testing program, Kodak, the film manufacturer, was notified in classified information of when there was going to be testing so that it could protect its film stocks from the radioactive contamination. But American parents were not able to protect their children from drinking the milk. Just knowing that, what we were talking about earlier, that there are real people behind these exposures and how it destroyed their lives. In 1989, I testified in Congress with Millie Smith, and her whole life was ruined. She lived in poverty almost all of her life because of her illness, had thyroid cancer, and most of some of her classmates had cancer too, even in high school. From the start, Hanford officials knew that they were putting the public at risk, especially children. They knew of public health measures that would substantially reduce the radiation exposures to the workers and the public. Hanford officials misled workers and the public while maintaining an iron curtain of secrecy. So one of the main things that Hanford downwinders feel is this sense of being betrayed by their own government.
So did the Hanford local government not put in place public health measures because of money?
No.
Was it?
They didn't want to excite concern among the public. They were afraid, somebody had mentioned it earlier, they were afraid that if people knew about the radiation, that they would force the closure of Hanford. And they were probably right. But Hanford knew to give people with iodized salt, if you flood the thyroid with natural iodine, then it won't take up the radioactive, or at least not as much. It suppressed the information. And even after the Hanford shutting down, basically because they had enough plutonium in the 70s, if Hanford had come clean and told people, hey, we're sorry, we released this radiation into the air back in the 40s and 50s, you should go to your doctors and get your thyroid checked. There'd be people still alive now if they had known earlier. Shannon Rhodes, she had this exposure as a child and had thyroid problems, even had thyroid surgery in the late 70s. But the doctors only took out half of her thyroid. But if they had known that she had been irradiated as a child, they should have taken out all of her thyroid. And they missed some of the cancer. And when thyroid cancer gets missed, oftentimes it'll either go into the bone or into the lung. And Shannon died a horrific death, much pain for years because of lung cancer that had been originated in her thyroid.
Well, what about, you also mentioned radiation getting into the water.
Yes.
Which then ends up going all the way down the river, all the way to the Pacific Ocean perhaps.
Yeah. So the fish was contaminated, ducks and geese were contaminated, we got to get moving, but they discovered that even the oysters out in Willapa Bay on the Washington coast were contaminated with Hanford radiation above health standards.
If folks can save it for the roundtable discussion, we'll have more opportunity to discuss. But we do need to move to the next presentation, or you can ask while I
No, there's a point to add to that. One thing that I specifically studied with relation to the Hanford nucleosides exposure is the impact on the sturgeon population in the Columbia River. The Columbia River houses sturgeon that pretty much now all of the world's caviar comes from. Interestingly enough, that is actually one of the key places where you can trace the sturgeon's long lifetimes. And it's fascinating that you've been able now to see the traces of radiation spread internationally because of its outsourcing all across the world. So
Sturgeon lived for decades, some up to 100 years, and they're huge fish, and so they're resident in the river, and they pick up a lot of stuff.
So are they still contaminated?
Sturgeon from
Yeah.
Elk River.
Yeah.
let's give Jim a round of applause.